My name is Chris Fleming. I grew up in the Midwest, and up until I was 5 years old, I lived what most would consider a normal life. But then everything changed. I started seeing ghosts. First, I started hearing my name being called, tapped on the shoulder, and then one night, a ghost actually appeared in the hallway and I was face to face with it. I was terrified growing up as a kid. Because a lot of these ghost experiences were going on in the house, I started recording what's called EVP, electronic voice phenomena. So I realized at a very young age that I could talk to ghosts, that I was a psychic medium.
He calls it the way that he sees it.
Okay, I'm putting my right hand up. Please pass by my right hand.
It did it in between your hand and head.
Working with a lot of different paranormal investigators, scientists, and engineers, I realized it was time to put together the perfect team.
Hey, Chris, I got a bunch of pictures here that I actually like you to take a look at. Well, my name's Cody. I'm the photo and video expert. I got into investigating in 1985. This was back before the current fad of ghost hunting.
A hardcore skeptic that got into this field to debunk the field, but quickly realized that this stuff was real.
I've seen mysteries that I cannot explain. So I became one of the more knowledgeable people in this field. It's almost going on 30 years now. We've been experimenting a little bit with that full spectrum photography. Well, full spectrum camera is a camera that is able to capture light that the human eye cannot see.
I mean, you can obviously tell that there's a person standing there.
They're in the infrared range, they're in the UV range, way above what human eyes can see.
My name is Greg. They call me Doc. I'm a scientist and an audio expert, but I really think there's more than meets the eye when it comes to this world. That's why I do this.
We are investigating the mysteries of American history through the paranormal.
When it comes to U.S. history, there's no shortage of unanswered questions and intense conspiracy theories. Who killed JFK? Was the moon landing fake? What happened to Jimmy Hoffa? Recently, I began exploring the conspiracy theories surrounding President Lincoln's assassination, theories that have been fiercely debated for nearly 150 years. So today, we're headed to Washington, D.C. to visit the historic Ford's Theater, where Lincoln was murdered. My goal is to connect with the spirits there and finally get some answers. A few days before his assassination on April 14th, Lincoln shared a recent dream with a small group that included his wife. He had these dreams of seeing somebody that had died and passed away. He walked into the East Room of the White House to find a covered corpse, guarded by soldiers and surrounded by a group of mourners. When Lincoln asked one of the soldiers who had died, the soldier replied, "The president, he was killed by an assassin." Now, Lincoln had this dream.
I mean, there's Abraham Lincoln, there's JFK, Malcolm X. They all had premonitions that they were going to be dead or assassinated, and those all came to pass.
There have been a ton of sightings of Lincoln's ghosts throughout the years. There's tons of credible witnesses, dignitaries, people that have no motive for making something up.
British Prime Minister Winston Churchill loved to retire late, take a long hot bath. Well, that's a great image in my head. He was startled to see Lincoln standing by the fireplace in the room. Leaning on the mantle, Churchill, always quick on the uptake, blinked and said, "Good evening, Mr. President. You seem to have me at a disadvantage." Lincoln smiled softly and disappeared. When we got to Ford's Theater, we met Tiffany, a historian that's here to help us separate fact from fiction.
She told us about the events of April 15th, 1865.
President Lincoln was attending a play at Ford's Theater that night, and John Wilkes Booth, after some intense planning, managed to sneak up behind him and shoot him in the head.
That week alone, Lincoln had had 80 assassination threats on his life. But then you have John Parker. Parker was the only officer who was actually assigned to watch Lincoln specifically. So John Parker was supposed to be guarding the president's booth at the play, leaves in the second act, and goes to the saloon next door called the Star Saloon. It was really popular at the time. We know John Wilkes Booth went to the Star Saloon that evening before he assassinated the president. Though we're not sure if these two men ran into each other, if they had a conversation.
The plot thickens. There's an awful lot of coincidences building up in this case. It makes you question, do we know the real truth?
It gets even better. Not only did Parker not get fired after the assassination of Lincoln, he continued to work in the White House after Lincoln's death.
It's messed up, man.
theater actually opened in August of 1863. But one part that is pretty much original is the box that Lincoln was in the night that he was assassinated. And Lincoln would have been on the right-hand side of the box. It's pretty incredible. I mean, you read about this stuff and you see photos, but it's so different when you're actually here.
But to actually be here, a piece of time, it's incredible.
After Booth assassinated Lincoln, he jumped onto the stage and he screamed the Virginia state motto, which means death always to tyrants.
That's a pretty steep fall. I mean, did he break his leg? Did he hurt
broke his
himself?
leg.
And yet he was still able to escape with no problem. With
Yeah,
a broken
he was able
leg.
to escape. Yeah.
Almost instantly, I felt a heavy spiritual presence. I was being pulled down a path that I had to follow. We're definitely not alone, guys. I see Booth talking to a guy, telling the guy to do something for him. The guy distracted somebody else, which maybe it's the bodyguard. I felt some type of connection with John Wilkes Booth. After shooting Lincoln, Booth jumped from the box onto the stage, looked at the crowd, gasps, some recognitions. Okay, Booth has an ego. He even looked back for 1 second. And he made sure he looked at the people almost as if this was something that he would be remembered for. He was arrogant, egotistical. Not only was I seeing from his point of view a little bit of emotion, but also some of the people that were involved. The bodyguard or whoever was supposed to be up here standing watching was not involved with what happened. He was distracted, was told by someone that Booth knew to leave this place.
John Parker went to drink with 2 people who helped transport Lincoln here. He didn't go drink alone.
So they could have been the ones who were distracting.
Now, there was exchange of money. There was money that was going on here. There's gold involved. Who the hell would have been involved with the money? There's an outside source. There's an outside source now. There's someone politically that was involved that originally started this whole thing.
You get into these thick mysteries. I mean, is there another version of history that's been concealed? You know, because that's not the way they want it to look like.
Oh my God, my leg's getting heavier. There's a difference of energy up here, more of a heaviness compared to down there. Thicker. We weren't allowed to go right in the box where Abraham Lincoln was shot and killed. John Wilkes Booth, are you present with us right now?
Yes.
Spirits of heaven and spirits that connect between this realm and the other. Or perhaps even Lincoln or Booth himself. What political person, powerful person, put money towards this? Jefferson! Did you hear that whisper?
I heard that.
Did you hear that?
Yeah. I'm a skeptic. It did sound like Chris caught the name Jefferson Davis in an EVP.
Now that's important because Jefferson was the president of the Confederacy. Well, we believe that Jefferson Davis may have funded or somehow was involved with John Wilkes Booth.
If Lincoln had disappeared, the Northern movement may very well have asked to abandon the war.
Conspiracy, murder, execution, all this stuff was just beyond what we expected.
We headed back to the motel to review the data and discuss our next steps. Cody captured a couple photographs at Ford Theater. You can see distinctly that there is the stage. Then he shows me another picture where you see this little mist. Fine. Is it an artifact, something like that? Well, he shows me another picture where now the mist is even higher up. Well, it moved up here.
Yeah.
So this mist is moving towards Lincoln's box and closer to us. I believe this was the spirit of John Wilkes Booth. Jefferson funding money over to Booth and whatever group he was with to try to make a difference in the war. I mean, this could be a really significant connection. Well, the only person that's going to know for sure, obviously, is John Wilkes Booth because he killed the president. I still feel that there's something else he wants to tell us.
Well, it sounds a little bit like you're going more towards the conspiracy theory. I wanted to refer him to some credible writers like Ed Collimore, just to give him a better understanding of these conspiracy theories, but from a credible source. We could pull up his article. It might be of interest to you.
Okay, here's one. Ed Collymore, John Wilkes Booth.
In that article that we found, he also quotes a person named Joanne Hume. I mean, there's actually someone alive related to him?
Looks that way.
You know what? I'd like to talk to her.
And Kensington, that's not that far, is it?
No. Okay, let's do it. After killing President Lincoln, John Wilkes Booth escaped with a co-conspirator. 12 days later, he was shot and killed by U.S. forces at the Garrett Barn, which was burned to the ground. Hi, Joanne's Chris.
Hi, Chris. Come on in.
I was excited to meet Joanne Hume. She knows everything about John Wilkes Booth because his legacy has haunted her family for so long. Joanne, thanks for meeting with us on such short notice. Can you tell us, what is your relation with John Wilkes Booth?
My great-great-great-grandmother, Jane Booth, is the sister of Junius Brutus Booth, John Wilkes Booth's father. And so my great-great-great-grandmother was also John Wilkes Booth's aunt. So I'm related by blood.
There you go.
All right.
Can't get tighter than that, huh?
The family itself was so remarkable. Junius Brutus Booth was friends with Lord Byron. Edwin Booth was painted by John Singer Sargent. His father was good friends with Edgar Allan Poe.
It's an incredible family.
It is an incredible family, and as the family would say, this one man's act does not represent the enormous talent of this family.
We wondered if you knew if the Booth family had any connection to Jefferson Davis.
Well, I mean, it's documented in numerous books that Jefferson Davis was in Montreal at a hotel having meetings the same time as John Wilkes Booth was there.
But do you think they met? Do you
Oh,
have any-
absolutely. I believe that they met.
Do you know if there was any money or any gold that was exchanged?
Sure. John Wilkes Booth came back from Montreal with checks drawn on Canadian banks.
Can you share with us everything you know about what happened after that night?
You know, this started with what my mother said. She said, when you study the Civil War, they're going to tell you that John Wilkes Booth, assassinated the president. We all acknowledge that. And that he escaped. It wasn't a surprise that there were these Southern sympathizers taking him along the way. I do not believe that he was at Garrett's barn. Captain James William Boyd was in the barn. This is a man who physically looked almost like a twin of John Wilkes Booth. I think he lived for many years, a sad, lonely, broken man.
I think she has no reason to be lying about this. I'm not seeing any kind of a motive, anything that she would gain by it. And a lot of what she's saying is actually backed up by historical evidence.
And then that takes us back to the whole issue of the cemetery. We don't even believe that there is a body in the cemetery.
She believes there's this big cover-up because the family wants to exhume the body to verify his identity by DNA, but the government is not letting them.
If that's not Booth's body, then that would mean he wasn't killed in the barn and he survived in exile, contrary to the historic record, which would also signify a much deeper conspiracy.
At some point in somebody's lifetime, it's going to be proven whether that body is John Wilkes Booth's or not. And I'd like it to be in my lifetime so my children and grandchildren don't have to live with that hanging over their head just like we had to live with that hanging over our head.
So it sounds like the only way we're going to get any closer to the truth is to actually go to John Wilkes Booth's grave.
I think so.
We headed off to the Booth plot, where most members of the Booth family are buried. Our hope was that we could speak with the spirits there to find out, is history accurate? Or did John Wilkes Booth really escape and live in hiding for another 30 or 40 years?
We're going to come across a stone in a minute, and this is where people perceive the unmarked grave to be. People that come to visit always leave like a Lincoln penny face up. I guess that's people's way of saying, you're a terrible person, John Wilkes Booth.
How does that make you feel seeing that?
Oh, it makes me feel horrendous. There's never a release from it. I mean, it wasn't hardly even whispered about in our family at all. But you knew that anybody that knew you or your sibling, they just got an automatic hatred towards you and your family. This is John Wilkes and Edwin's parents, Junius Brutus Booth Sr., Mary Ann Booth. This would be right here, would be the burial of whoever the body in the barn was.
So pretty much the public believes that Booth is buried here, but you don't believe he's buried here.
Now, I don't even know if I believe that anybody is buried here.
Let's try to find out. Let me see if I can communicate with him to see if Booth is actually here. If we don't get John Wilkes Booth, we may have some other spirits that can tell us the truth of what's going on here. Spirits, can you please talk to us about this gravesite? Do not record. They don't want this to be recorded.
Asia. He just said Asia.
Yeah.
Asia was John Wilkes Booth's sister.
Is Edwin Booth with us in spirit right now? Yes. Edwin Booth is with us right now in spirit. Goldsmith.
His grandfather, who was a goldsmith in England. And that kind of started us on things that meant a lot to me.
John Wilkes Booth, are you with us right now?
Here?
Getting chills now. John Wilkes Booth, is your spirit trapped on Earth? Booth is stuck here as a ghost in his own personal hell, reliving his greatest suffering of guilt and regret over and over again. But as Booth was communicating with us, Cody was having technical issues.
You know when it said don't record?
Do not record. Did you hear what it said?
I was over there, and I literally watched the battery indicator just go. I had a spare battery in my pocket, took that one out, switched it, turned it back on. We knew the batteries were charged. We charged them before we got there. We checked the levels and made sure all the gear was good.
Later on, we discovered that something very interesting had occurred with the pictures he had managed to take before he lost power. These photos should not be read.
Should be black and white because they're infrared.
Right, so it's like if you're shooting black and white film and all of a sudden you get a color image.
That's just freaky.
It seems as though the spirits were flexing a little bit when we didn't heed their warning to not record the Spirit Box session. John, do you feel that you killed a great man? Tricked.
Tricked, sure. He was tricked, of course. He thought he was going to come back, a conquering hero.
Did your physical body die on the Garrett farm, or did you live out your life under a different name? Boston shot me? What does that mean?
Do you want the grave to be dug up and have this proven?
I would.
Thank you so much. He knows it takes a lot out of me and a lot out of my family.
John Wilkes Booth, you have an opportunity to end this right now. Say it. I'm sorry. Forgive. Did you hear that? John Wilkes Booth really was asking for forgiveness from the family itself.
I forgive you, Johnny. Your whole family forgives you.
She started getting emotional, really seemed to bring out a resolution of all the issues that she had had about John Wilkes Booth and the family.
In hearing Booth ask for forgiveness from the family whose name he had damaged so deeply, it seemed as though Joanne had gotten the resolution she wanted for so long.
This is an amazing family that did amazing things, and yet there is always the name of John Wilkes Booth. People figure after 150 years, just let it be, but I couldn't let it be.
Who would have thought that a visit to the Ford's Theater would ultimately lead to closure for the family of John Wilkes Booth? But we still didn't know if Booth died at the Garrett farm and was buried in the family plot, or did he evade capture?
That answer came to us as we reviewed the data.
We got an EVP that said, "Boston shot me."
At first, we had no idea what it meant. Booth was nowhere near Boston when he was shot.
But then Tiffany revealed a fascinating piece of information. The person that shot John Wilkes Booth at the Garrett farm was named Boston Corbett.
Maybe John Wilkes Booth did actually die at the Garrett farm.